What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the 2012 mixtape by Paul Wall. Basically, this project is called No Sleep Till Houston, and it came out in the winter of 2012. Now, the thing about this particular project is this is the follow-up one. Like, there was a mixtape I just learned about. I guess there's another one that came out in 2010 called Soul Music, but around that time, Paul Wall dropped his 2010 album Heart of a Champion, which I reviewed way back in the day, and it was kind of the last real burst of like mainstream Paul Wall as far as that kind of went. He kind of started to go independent and stuff, but in 2012, he was still kind of somewhat mainstream, but he was starting to kind of cross back over into the underground type fare as far as that kind of happened. I feel like the last real album by Paul Wall that has a wiki article about it is Check Season from late 2013, which I'm going to get to that album eventually, but for the longest time it didn't have a wiki article, so it was really Heart of a Champion that had the most recent kind of information about it in terms of Paul Wall. But this is a project that I definitely enjoyed and I did mess with back in the day. But No Sleep Till Houston is a project I remember from back in the day. I downloaded it back in the day. I remember a few bops on there, but I don't remember the promotion from it. But I would have to say there was at least one single that I'm going to talk about. But this is actually a pretty litty project. I really like this quite a bit. It's been a while since I've given a mixtape like a rave score. It's been a while since I've given a mixtape like a super rave score. I guess I can go ahead and say that this mixtape is going to get a 10 out of 10. There's just that many songs. The thing about it is, about this particular project, is there's quite a few songs on here. It has more than 12 songs. It has 16 songs on here, and out of those 16, there's really only one song I don't recommend, just to kind of talk about it like that. I just would have to say this is pretty interesting just because this is like some mainstream Paul Wall. It definitely has like the appeal and some folks on here. It has like Kirko Bangs on here, has Bun B on here, Slim Thug. This mixtape has Kirko Bangs on here, who was a mixtape cat that was popular around that time, has Bun B on there, has Slim Thug on there a number of times. Killa Killian, who's a part of Slim Thug's collective, is on there. There's just some good folks on here as far as that kind of happens. Texas oriented, but I would have to say that this is still kind of like a last call burst of Paul Wall from his mainstream kind of appeal before he crossed over again into the underground. I just would have to say this is definitely one I recommend, and considering that this project is free, there's really no reason not to mess with it. I just would have to say there's plenty of good stuff on here. Paul Wall is really packed to the gills full of club cuts on this particular time, so he definitely has a pretty good outing for as far as some of this kind of happens. There are some other surprising songs on here. There's a couple car cruising tunes. There's a couple kind of cruising tunes for like some commute as far as that kind of happens. There's just some overall good stuff on here that just really has like some crazed appeal. But I definitely would have to say that this is pretty flashy for the time. I definitely think for 2012, 2013, the early 2010s, as far as that kind of happens, this is a lot of Liddy type fare that just has like some really kind of stunt worthy kind of flash moments that kind of revitalize Paul Wall. Like, I definitely felt like, I don't remember what I scored Heart of a Champion, but I did review the Fast Life album from 2009 just back in August, and I really did like most of that particular project. I mean, I kind of felt like some of the more homely kind of moments didn't quite hit as heavily for Paul Wall, but this album really doesn't have that many of those. I mean, it has a couple of ruminating cuts, but for the most part, this is pretty much just sheer kind of just weekend kind of life as far as that kind of went. So this is definitely an improvement, and I just would have to say I do recommend Heart of a Champion and Fast Life. These are just some extra ones, but I just would have to say this is probably one of Paul Wall's best projects just overall. I would have to say he just really knocked this one out of the park. It's just strange how that kind of happened for like a mixtape as far as that kind of went, but it's good. So I would have to say so. Really, the only song I don't recommend on this whole 16 song mixtape would just be Money Part 2, which is kind of disappointing because that has Gutta Gutta from Young Money on there, and I enjoy his projects as far as I enjoy Gutta Gutta's projects, so it's too bad that this one wasn't a hitting one. But pretty much the reason why is I just couldn't really get into the production of this particular one. It just didn't compare to Money Part 1. I kind of felt like it was just kind of like a floaty and spacey type beat that just didn't work that well. It just did not compare to Money Part 1. I just felt like that kind of nightclub fare of Money Part 1 just hit a lot heavier, and it was just kind of surprising. I think Gutta Gutta probably should have been on the first Money song as opposed to this one. This didn't quite fit him as well, but that's just kind of the concept about it. But to talk about these other 15 songs on here, the thing about it is I was trying to look up music videos from this particular project to see if there were any singles released from this, because 2012 mixtape tended to have like mixtape singles as far as that kind of went. Like Rick Ross with Stay Schemin', and like Meek Mill with like some of his songs like Amen off of Dream Chasers 2 and stuff like that. I would have to say is I was wondering if Paul Wall kind of had a single. There was at least a song that had a music video for it, but apparently that was Slim Thug's song. But it's interesting that it's on this mixtape too. I don't know what became of this song because I don't remember Slim Thug dropping an album in 2012, but I would have to say the single that's kind of one that at least has a music video for it is Houston, and this has Slim Thug and Zero on there. So Houston is kind of like an ESPN like pounding bravado cut. I would have to say it's good for a night out and going to sports games type feels as far as that kind of goes. And it's just an overall kind of festive song. So it's definitely one if you're just trying to go to a football, baseball, basketball game, something like that. Just anything sports related as far as that kind of happens. If you're just used to ESPN, Sports Center, some of those type things, just from back in the day, 2010s type fare. This is definitely one to kind of hear as far as that kind of happens. Just real NFL like tune as far as that kind of goes. I just would say it's a nice pounding one that just has a lot of bravado towards it. And it's just a good outing song for going out and about. This is great if you're just trying to go to a sports game and just kind of kick back. I would definitely recommend swilling a few beers and that type of stuff while stepping out for some of these type things. Definitely works pretty well. And thing about it is trying to remember like 15 different songs as far as this kind of happens. There's just a lot of nightclub flash on here. I'm just going to try to get to some of these. Like there's definitely some good ones like Two Cups. It's kind of like a good swirling beat to get crunk to. I would have to say it's good for like some Liddy night venue flash, and it's just good for it's some Liddy night venue flash for like a hype ass night. I would have to say this is definitely like a good one. Two Cups is a good song to get fucked up to as far as that kind of happens. These are just some real swirling ones that just hit pretty heavily. Another song like that would be F a Hater. Then there's some other ones like Right Now is a pretty good one for that, and I'm Really Fake. These are just some really kind of litty type ones to kind of have in that sense. I'm just going to talk about these just to try to remember every single one's going to take a while. So I just would have to say F a Hater. F a Hater kind of has some good topic matter. I would have to say it's a dodgy nightclub. This is kind of some dodgy nightclub flexing as far as that kind of happens. This dodging like the haters and the weak-minded type folks as far as that kind of happens. This works for like some lit social kind of jive, I would have to say, and this is an overall kind of hit. This is just a good boppish kind of one. Right Now is another one just like that. This is definitely a pretty heavy one. This is like a dap getting and kind of entry things getting started. Right Now is kind of some dap getting and entry kind of things getting started. Night venue hype, I would have to say. It's just an overall crunk song to kind of have, and it's just an overall highlight. This is definitely one. There's just plenty of pounding cuts on here. Most of these beats are pretty excellent, I would have to say. They just work extremely well. This is kind of one of those ones that just is great for just getting to the nightclub and kind of the initial kind of stuff as far as just fraternizing, that type of stuff, just getting started, getting the drink in your cup, some of those type moments, scoping out the women that you're going to talk to, some of those type moments as far as that kind of happens, just getting ready to see what's going to go on in the nightclub, and just the early pizzazz as to how that kind of happens. Just some good stuff for that. I'm Really You Fake is another one that's kind of like that. This one has Bun B on there and some other cats. So I'd have to say, like, I'm Really You Fake is kind of a hype night out song for like some quick times. I would have to say this song is an easy midnight and crunk type craze. I would have to say it's just an overall boppish kind of one. So there's just a lot of heavy hitting, kind of snappy tempo type ones that just work extremely well on here. Another one that's kind of vanilla. This one's a little bit more kind of recognizable, but it is kind of more of a vanilla beat on here, and that's Bad Bitches. This is definitely kind of a vanilla stunt song for Bad Chicas. I would have to say Bad Bitches, Bad Chicas, definitely. It's an early kind of IG hit, I would have to say. This just reminds me of something that was kind of on Instagram stories and stuff like that in like the early days of Instagram back in 2012, 2013, as far as I kind of went. This is just kind of an early stunt song for some IG times back in the early 2010s, and it just has some heavy pizzazz kind of fun, I would have to say. So it's just a good boppish one. Probably one of the best beats on the album would be Money Part 1. Probably one of the best beats on the mixtape would be Money Part 1. This is definitely kind of a synthy, kind of boppish flash for some evening times, and just is a good balling. This is just kind of a good balling song, and it's just got some exhilarating kind of vibes about it. So this is definitely kind of definitely one of the crunchier beats on here. It's definitely some pizzazz as far as that kind of happens. This real kind of litty type fare just in the sense, but this whole album kind of has that, or this whole mixtape particularly has that kind of vibe. But this is just a nice one. Probably this is a song that I go back with. This is definitely a song that I liked quite a bit back in the day. This is one of the songs I remembered from like the early 2010s when I listened to this, but She Likes It. Definitely like this one. It's a stock hit for some evening hype, I would have to say, and it's just a vanilla kind of mixtape hit with like a gleaming kind of snarish beat. So I definitely like the kind of gleaming sparkle that this particular production kind of had on here. Just an overall nice one. Just kind of a nightclub song. Just kind of works in that sort of sense. It's kind of like a mixtape hit that's just kind of something that Future or Yo Gotti would kind of do. That's kind of trap heavy. This is kind of like a trap type song from Paul Wall. He doesn't typically always do trap, but it's just kind of a good mixtape type fare. Something that Mike Will made it, or Southside, or one of those type producers would produce something like that. But this works. This is just really like a kind of 2010s trap type mixtape vanilla cut that just works pretty well. Definitely like that one. Paul Wall is a pretty clockwork hustler, but he doesn't talk overabundantly about money in terms of like the song topics. I mean, he does in the lyrics, but at least in terms of the song topics, it's not as heavy this time. But this one, the one that has that particular type fare about it is I Get It. I do like this one. This is like a hype and energized kind of money getting cut. I would have to say it's some litty. This is some litty times for being on the grind, I would have to say. And it's just an overall kind of hype one that just works pretty damn well. Just would have to say this is kind of one where you're just, this is the sort of stuff that Future does when he gets really energized, and it's just kind of a make it rain type cut. Just definitely want to get pumped and just kind of be overall excited. Just kind of the thrill of just having a lot of money and just wanting to spend it, kind of the money burning a hole in your pocket and just wanting to get some spending going and that type of stuff. Just having a real excellent kind of time and just being in a pretty exhilarated type mood, I would have to say. That's a nice one. But then to talk about some of these ruminating type cuts on here, one in particular that I feel like is a pretty good one. To talk about some of the ruminating cuts on this particular project, one that works quite well is That's the Way Love Goes. This is kind of a dreary kind of Traverse story tune, I would have to say. It's a commerce type bop, definitely, and it's good for some real talk, I would have to say. So this is one where Paul Wall talks about some ladies' woes that just didn't work out for him as far as that kind of particularly happened. Just a heavy hitting. This is a story tune that works quite well, and this just happens to be one that just is like an extra kind of song. Just as this is a varietized type tune that works pretty well. It's like something separate from most of the kind of pounding club cuts that are on this particular album, so it just happens to hit pretty heavily. And this is just a nice one. We probably could have used more songs like this or more varietized type topics, but I do like all the nightclub songs on here. It definitely works. Another one that's kind of like that would be First Time You Say No. This is another ruminating type cut, definitely. This is kind of an overcast kind of ruminating cut for foul homies, I would have to say. And this is just the hitting kind of real talk kind of vibes that this particular song kind of has. These two songs, there's probably at least another one. Like I feel like no one I'm talking about is like another one that kind of has that particular type fare as far as that kind of happens. I don't know if I talked about that one. Maybe I did. I just would have to say, First Time You Say No is a great ruminating cut, just for like a more cloudy and kind of overcast day. Just some food for thought type stuff as far as that kind of happens. A particular hit song I don't know if I talked about, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it again just in case is know what I'm talking about. And this is like a dreary kind of car-centric morning and brunch commerce too, and I would have to say it's a good lit kind of screwed up bop, definitely. So this is a song that's kind of DJ Screw meets kind of like morning commerce and things like that. This is kind of almost jazzy in a sense. It's something that's just great for like 10 o'clock in the morning, going to Starbucks or Target, some stuff like that as far as that kind of happens, just with like a Texas kind of appeal towards it. Just with kind of a Texas kind of appeal towards it, I would have to say. And this is the cat that's on here is particularly, it's Kurt Cobain, so he kind of does like some kind of dreary type stuff. He really sounds somewhat like Drake on here. It just works in that sort of sense. It's definitely something for like some mid-morning commerce as far as that kind of goes. Definitely like the kind of makeshift appeal of this particular one. This works as like a kind of litty, kind of 2010 centric, and this kind of 2010s contemporary kind of rap tune. Definitely like the concept of that one. Bread on the Menu is another highlight. This is kind of like a brewing kind of nightclub kickback. I would have to say it's more centered and relaxed, but it's a pretty effective cut, I would have to say. So this is kind of one. This one's a nightclub song, but it's just not quite as hype. This one's just kind of more of a brewer and just kind of more of like a relaxed type cut, just to kind of sip some brews and sip some beers, that type of stuff as far as that kind of happens. Just kind of kick back and just reflect a bit. And some of the times just a more, and it's not really a sluggish song, but it's just kind of a more relaxed, just R&R type song for being in a nightlife as far as that kind of happens. Definitely like the appeal of that. Just would have to say. Another nice song with some pizzazz on here, and this is another one that kind of shot for radio type appeal. It feels like As She Know It. This is like a solid pop rap like commercial feels that it has. I would have to say it's just a dance club and promo night kind of appeal, definitely. I just would say this is overall kind of like a radio ready one. This hook that this cat does, I don't know who did the hook on here, but it's a particularly kind of gleaming one. I would have to say this one really feels like it's commercial almost. It definitely feels commercial, especially for Paul Wall as he was starting to get more distant from that particular type feel as far as that kind of happens. But this one feels like something that's ripped out of like the MySpace days of like late 2000s, early 2010s rap music as far as that kind of happens. It's a real kind of commercial and promo type feel as far as that kind of goes. And this one's kind of like dance club oriented, I would have to say, which is just, there's a lot of nightclub and strip club type songs on here and kind of more jazzy night venue type boss, but there's not a ton of dance club type songs. I would say this is one of the few ones that kind of feels that way. So it's kind of the concept. And then I would say Ballin' is definitely another highlight on here. This is a pounding kind of nightclub cut. I would have to say it's a pseudo kind of drill rap tune, definitely, and it's similar to I Am Not a Star by Rick Ross. So I kind of feel like this is interesting that Paul Wall attempted some drill type music. This was kind of something that was starting to phase out a bit by 2012. At least it was changing over to the hands of Chief Keef and folks like them. I would have to say some of those type folks. I reviewed more of them. I can't remember at this point, but this would have to say like it just reminds me of something that was kind of like Waka Flocka Flame and early 2010s type drill that was kind of going on around that time. Rick Ross and Waka Flocka Flame, some of those type folks like Harden the Paint, some of those type moments definitely works pretty well. Some Thug is on this particular song, so he helps bolster that. So it's a good example of that. But yeah, I would have to say that's 15 out of 16 songs on this particular project. So yeah, definitely I would say this mixtape gets a 10 out of 10. The social score I'm going to go ahead and give a 10 out of 10 because this project is just packed to the gills. Like Paul Wall really stepped out on this particular project, had tons of songs for going out, not just going out, but having like a pretty ravenous and this overall sheer time to kind of have for just an eviscerating type feel. The only real complaint I would say about this Nightlife is just the fact there's not really dance type tunes. The ladies songs are kind of, I mean, there's not overabundant kind of ladies tunes. I would have to say maybe She Know It and maybe like a couple other ones like Bad Bitches, but for the most part, it's pretty much like standard, just like more bravado and kind of stunt and flexing type stuff. It's not like that's a bad thing. It's Nightlife. Either way, it's going to be some stunt type stuff. There's going to be women around. So I just would have to say it's some real kind of flashy type stuff for some venues and as far as that kind of happens. But this is it's just kind of minimum on like the pop rap feel as far as that kind of goes with it. But I would have to say the social score definitely gets like a 10. I would have to say if I didn't already say that. So I just kind of look after the concept like this is a pretty litty project overall. There's tons of kickback. This would have to say the concept of it. There's like some good commerce type tunes, some ruminating that kind of works. There's at least 3 songs for like some mid morning kind of commerce. It's interesting to kind of get Paul Wall in like the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock morning type stuff for more of like Panera Bread and Target and Starbucks type commerce as far as that kind of happens. I mean, obviously on some of these songs, it felt like Paul Wall was more in like the chopped and screwed type vibe, but you at least get something for like some of that commerce as just as things kind of have somewhat of a blue collar type feel. But most of this album, I'd say this album's probably about 70-80% like nightlife and maybe like 20 or so 20-15% like more midday kind of commerce as far as that kind of happens, but it's at least pretty good to kind of have this for a mixtape. That's pretty excellent. This would have to say. So it's some good concepts as far as that kind of happens. So there's a good appeal about it. So I would say in terms of the future, like Paul Wall has been putting out tons of projects, so he has a whole bunch. I'm going to get to some more of these. I do want to review some albums like Chick Magnet, and there's one in particular like the Poet that I really want to get to, but there are some more of these. We'll get to some of those, but this is definitely a pretty sheer mixtape classic. I would definitely recommend this mixtape. It's definitely a classic mixtape as far as I see it. This would have to say it's pretty sheer and on top of things. 10 out of 10 definitely, and I'm going to review some more of these projects, but this is definitely one that you should not hesitate to check out.